and founder of the Global Fossil Fuel Treaty, I am inspired to continue doing this work. And as a mother, I stand before you somewhat heartbroken. It's been hard today. It's been hard, and many of the stories that we've heard today and the places we've heard about I've been to. This isn't the first time I've met many of you in the room, but to hear it all together, to have this tour around the world, well, that was something. I want to just take a couple of moments to reflect on some of the implications on some of the early testimonies we heard. Dr. Shivan Kartha, if he's still here, oh, there he is, Shivan. Antonio Yuhas, the investigative journalist, two people that I have followed and learned from for a decade, and they set a stage which we can't forget. When many of us started this work, standing up to talk about fossil fuel projects in our own communities, we didn't have the backing of the science that we have today. We didn't, because for 30 years the world has been talking about emissions and modeling and numbers and not talking about fossil fuel production, unless you live it. But now what they reminded us is the International Energy Agency, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They have all acknowledged that the science is very clear. The UN high-level expert body on net zero, no new fossil fuel projects or fossil fuel investments fits within Paris goals and the goals of keeping climate warming to below 1.5 degrees. It doesn't fit. The science says that. The scientists say it in the halls of the UNFCCC and here at Climate Week, and yet we hear about all of these projects growing around the world. The UN Production Gap Report, created in part early on by Stockholm Environment Institute and still, the UN Production Gap Report that we waited 30 years for shows us that we're on track to produce 110% more oil, gas, and coal by 2030 than we can ever burn if we want to stay below 2 degrees. So we're embroiled in this project when you put it all together, where the world's financial, intellectual, and political capital is working to dig up stuff that we know that we can't burn, or more lives will be lost. We're going to hear this week that there's exciting work in renewables around the world, and renewables are critical. But that tripling of renewables goals that we heard about in Dubai, it didn't come with a commitment to make sure that it displaced fossil fuel assets. 10 years ago, 80% of the energy used on this planet came from fossil fuels. Today, even though we've had remarkable growth in renewable energy, and even though renewable energy is cheaper than oil, gas, and coal now in every single country on Earth, price parity, today, 80% of the energy used on this planet still comes from fossil fuels. Because it's not just about building solar panels. The atmosphere doesn't care how many solar panels we build. The atmosphere cares how many fossil fuel projects we stop. We heard after that about the technological fixes, the carbon capture and storage, the offsets, the false solutions that in themselves are threatening nature and being used to justify the projects. Net zero by 2050. How many of the projects we heard about today are being justified because they're net zero by 2050? Well, you can't get to zero by adding tons onto the ledger. It's not a transition if we're growing the problem. I won't forget Antonio saying, it's not only predictable, but it was predicted. Not only predictable, but it was predicted. When I visited a lot of these places, met a lot of you, and seen your homes and what you're going through, many times I caught myself thinking, this is a scandal, this is a tragedy. It's a tragedy what's happening in the Amazon. It's a tragedy what's happening in many countries in Africa. It's a tragedy what's happening in northern Alberta and Athabasca Chipewyan territory. I urge you to remind yourself that it's not a tragedy, it's a scandal. A tragedy is something, a problem we don't have a solution for. A scandal. A scandal is a problem where a solution was known and not acted upon. And today we heard about the Mountain Valley Pipeline, the communities being given water in plastic bottles because the companies are continuing to pollute what's coming out of their tap. Not a tragedy, it's a scandal. In Louisiana, new LNG in communities that already have high cancer rates, children that are gasping for breath, and more plastic projects proposed. Not a tragedy, it's a scandal. I could go on and on, but you've heard a lot today. I will ensure, as a judge to this tribunal, that our written arguments reflect your lived experience and that our recommendations are heard around the world. Because reconciliation will not be run by staring down the barrel of a gun or by broken doors open, like in the case of Coastal GasLink. We as judges recognize today that the banks funding these new fossil fuel projects and the countries approving new fossil fuel projects threaten life on Earth, but we cannot continue to fight project by project. I have learned today that this is not just about decarbonization, it's about decolonization, it's about decentralization, it's about democracy. We've heard that it's about systems change. So how do you do systems change? What does that actually mean? I urge you to look up and join us. Many of you already are, and I thank you for the work you're doing to build the global fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty around the world. If it's new to you, fossilfueltreaty.org. 3,000 organizations like many of yours, now in 117 countries, saying no, it's not about no in my community. It's about no. No new projects, no new expansion, and in order to get there, we need countries to cooperate. Because that drilling that you heard about in the Amazon, it's not, Ecuador can't, Peru can't stop that on their own. They're doing it to feed their debt. We need new global governance, new international cooperations, trade rules, tax agreements, debt forgiveness, and that's what we're working on at the Fossil Fuel Treaty. That's what 13 nation states and more this week have joined, hundreds of cities, 3,000 organizations, thousands of scientists, because together we are stronger than apart. What we heard today and saw was incredible courage. The courage to show up. Thank you for showing up. History is made by those who show up. And in this movement, in this tribunal, we're making history. Thank you.